Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Dear listener, how are things out there? There's a lot of difficult things going on in the world. How do you keep well? We all have tips we can share with one another. It's hard to know what you can do to help at times like this, especially when events are taking place far away. You might not be in a position to offer your physical help or be able to donate money, but simply doing what you can with loving intent is everything. We are all connected, so if we light a candle of hope and hold those suffering in our hearts, this has an effect. And in our local community, we can offer love to our fellow neighbours. Even just silently sending love to folks that you pass on the street helps. I was reminded to do that today when I noticed a couple of people passing by that looked like they were weighed down with difficult thoughts. It's a heavy time. Silent healers are everywhere. Perhaps you're one of them, or maybe, unbeknown to you, someone has sent you a blessing today. We can all remember a time when just a kind stranger helped lift our lives, and it meant so much. My guest on this episode is paranormal investigator Kate HareGirl Ray. You may know her from her YouTube channel of the same name, where she interviews folks about all things paranormal. It's an excellent show, alongside her regular co-host, Neil Rushton. Originally hailing from Nottingham, Kate has a particular interest in the Woollerton Gnomes case, and is a published author on the events that took place there in the 70s. She also writes for Haunted magazine and creates magnificent mushroom-related art pieces in her spare time. We talk about Kate's fantastic gnome encounter that took place when she was a teenager. She describes the time she acted as a mediator between a troubled homeowner and an angry French Fae being for the TV show Help My House is Haunted. And we also discuss the strange potency of this time we're living through. Check out the show notes for links to Kate's projects. And a video version of this episode will release on the Modern Fairy Sightings YouTube channel next weekend. A huge thanks to my dear Curious crew on Patreon, a warm and loving community who I'm so grateful to. In the bonus episode waiting for you on Patreon, Kate shares an absolutely shocking experience which left her terrified, but which she feels brought her an even greater understanding of and respect for the Fae. Join us there for access to a whole back catalogue of bonus episodes. This is a brilliant chat, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Though times are hard and it looks like this year may be bumpy, we need to buckle up and keep our energies high, resist fear and attempts at division. Stay focused on love, and it eternally helps to remain curious. Time to Welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast. I'm very excited to have Kate HareGirl Ray with me. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Kate is a podcaster on her channel on YouTube, Kate HareGirl Ray on YouTube. She is a practitioner of witchcraft and spiritual pathways, a teacher and artist and student of parapsychology. Kate researches ghosts and hauntings and writes for Haunted magazine. And she also researches elementals, that's, fairies, gnomes and pixies, and also authored a chapter in Woollerton Gnomes, the book edited by Simon Young that's available on Amazon. And as well as that, is well known for her amazing mushroom craft, which I popped into the fairy fair a couple of
Mhm.
weekends ago and saw you there, and you were super busy there. You've just had another really busy weekend with your stalls. So it'd be lovely to see your crafts in a minute, if you can
Yeah,
show us that, because they are absolutely amazing. So welcome, fellow
thank
fairy
you.
researcher.
Thank you for having me along. It's always nice to have a chat with you, Jo.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's always great to catch up. And, I think it's quite interesting that as researchers, yourself and I, people like Neil Rushton and many, many others, and Neil obviously joins you on your show on YouTube. What I think is really interesting is that, we've all had our own experiences, and that's kind of where we're at with this. We've had our own experiences. We're sort of trying to make sense of those. And, it helps to talk to other people about it. And we're interested in other people's views on it. And, we all kind of have a slightly different angle on it too. We all bring something new into that pot. So yeah, it's always good to chat. I heard your interview with Claire Casey. Well, I watched it because I actually listened to it and watched it, which was absolutely spectacular because you had, lots of orbs going on. So that was super interesting. So perhaps we'll get to chat about that shortly.
Yeah.
And I know that you had your own gnome experience. Could you kind of start off by telling us a little about yourself and how you got into doing what you do?
I kind of had stages with this throughout my life. It's kind of come and go, and it's come and go at certain points, I suppose, when I've needed it, or things have kind of reignited, especially the elemental and the fairy side of things. Growing up, I definitely had the notions that there was the other to the world, and it was something that I never really questioned that was the case. And it wasn't until I'd had that physical experience with the gnome that I kind of really started to believe in a more materialistic fashion. Before, it was just a kind of an understanding and a knowing, and it was unquestionable as a kid. It was just, it was part of the makeup of the world. I didn't have any great experience as a kid. I had a couple of I suppose supernaturally haunting type experiences when I was a child, but nothing to the proportion of a lot of people who come into the world of the paranormal and the understanding of it. So the gnome really kicked things off, and it's kind of come full circle because I seem to be inundated with gnome activity in my life at the minute, with especially with the Woollerton gnomes.
Yeah.
And things that are going off around there. Do you want me to talk you through the kind of the narrative of that gnome experience?
I would love that. Yeah, please do.
Okay. So I think I was about 15, maybe just turned 16. It was a Friday night. I was around a friend's house. There was quite a few of us sat round. It was in the time where there wasn't a lot of money. We didn't have a lot of money between us, so we were sat around getting bored basically on a Friday evening. And somebody in the group had this genius idea to get a book from the bookshelf and to use that in a way of divination. So the book that and there's a story attached to that as well, which I'll talk to you about. But the book they pulled off the shelf was a book called The Magical Atlas of Britain. I think that's the title of it. Basically, it's a book that contains different places around Britain that have magical attachment. So the plan was that we were to randomly open this book and randomly choose a place. So it was letting the book fall, and then somebody with their eyes shut sort of ran the finger down. It was something like that. It was basically throwing a dart into the book, and it landed on the Uffington Horse, which is the chalk horse
Oh.
in Oxfordshire. So this was the beginning of the journey. It was a weird start. And instead of being sensible and thinking we'll drive out there tomorrow, we decided that night that it was a good idea to drive out. So it was getting late. It was probably 11, 12 o'clock at night when we set off. By the time we'd arrived in the area, none of us knew the area. We couldn't find where we were going. So we pulled into a farm lane and just slept for a few hours. to which we were woken up by a farmer in the morning. This is a long version, by the way. So this farmer woke us up and with a, you're blocking my path for my tractor. And we asked him where the Uffington Horse was. He pointed us in the right direction. It wasn't quite dawn; it was just starting to break, so it was just starting to get light enough to hike up. And we actually went up the back side. If you've ever been to the Uffington Horse, the general route is to the front of the Uffington Horse, and you can see it. So we were clambering up the side, the back edge, and we got to the brow of this hill. But it was summertime, so it was getting warm, and a mist had formed that was so dense that we couldn't even see each other past a couple of meters. It was so intensely dense, and we didn't know that we had literally landed in the middle of the Uffington Horse, basically around the head area, until the mist dispersed a little. And as it dispersed, there was a herd of deer that had just sort of gathered on top of the Uffington Horse. And they didn't see us for that first sort of 30 seconds, as we were all stood like it was just one of those really spine-tingling, magical starts to the day. And they saw us and they kind of bolted and dispersed. And as they did, the mist started lifting as the sun was rising. So we were able to see the sunrise come upon, literally sat on top of the Uffington Horse. Now, the Magical Atlas book also talked about Wayland Smithy, which is a burial chamber, which you can take a really lovely walk down from the Uffington Horse down to Wayland Smithy, and it's after that incident and for years to come, it is one of my most favourite places. The vibrational properties of Wayland Smithy are second to none for me. It's got a really intense vibration to it. So we were walking down, and it's quite a channeled pathway as you're walking down from the Uffington Horse, and the sides of the path come up, as do the bottom of the hedges are sort of varying from a foot up to sort of waist height, as you'd expect in a rural area. And then the hedges are on top of it. So the verges go up. And the party of friends that I was with were a little bit older than me, and their stride was a little bit longer and had sort of darted off into marching stance to get down to Wayland Smithy. And I was sort of, bumbling along, hanging back. And I kept hearing what I could only describe, and still can only describe, as a singing sound that sounded like the clangers from it was kind of like a mix between a whistle and a humming noise, and there was lots. It was very melodic in a chaotic way, and it was coming from the verges, coming from the grass verges just underneath the hedges. So as I was walking, it was happening, but as soon as I stopped, the singing stopped, and it was frustrating. And I thought, I've got to find out what is making this noise. So I'm kind of carrying along a few steps and trying to sort of dive into the thicket, to which I could see these things disperse, but I couldn't make out what they were. And as luck would have it, or not, because it makes me sound crazy, I actually managed to dive into the verge and part the grass quick enough to see one of these things. And it was probably about the size of my hand, so sort of the body was a fist size, and it was shaped very much flat like a toad.
Okay.
And was on all fours, so and flat to the ground, but its head turned towards me to see who I was, and it was very mousy looking on the head, sort of black beady eyes, and humanoid mousy looking, so quite pointed features, and sort of downy hair that went down its back. But the thing that struck me, and I remember saying it out loud, was, it's got tweed trousers on. And it had this, like, because I'd have just been like, that, it's my mind playing tricks on me, it's some kind of creature. But this thing had a little pair of tweed trousers on.
Gosh, yeah.
And as soon as I don't know whether I said it out loud, I'm sure I did, but as soon as that came into being, it stared, it was absolutely terrified. It squealed so loud.
Oh.
And I squealed like, what is this? And sort of jumped back and off it shot.
Mm.
And the singing stopped. And I raced to catch up with my fellow travellers, and said to them, have you heard the singing? Have you heard these noises coming from the grass verges? And they were highly amused by me at that point, and thought I was slightly bonkers. But then when I said what I'd seen and I described it to them, I didn't live it down for the rest of the day. In fact, not a long time afterwards. So I shut shop on that, and I didn't. I no longer spoke about that particular story until it was 10 years later when I finally spoke to somebody about it, because I just felt so stupid about saying I've seen a gnome. And that's how I described it, because it was the only way that I could make sense of it, that it was this thing of the earth. And the only sort of elemental being that I could relate it to was a gnome. I since then have kind of revised my terminology, because it almost blended like a sod of earth. So it almost blended into its own landscape as this sort of clump of earth, if you like. It was that kind of coloration. So it became known as the sod. That's how I referred to it. Interestingly enough, and I know this is a side, but this is one of these lovely sort of coincidences that synchronicities, if you like, and serendipity that kind of happen in the world. I had forgotten completely what the book was called, and I had spent the rest of my probably another 20 years searching for this book, not knowing the title. I'd Googled it, I'd asked people if they knew what this book was that would flick through to get to the Uffington Horse. And I know you have read Rob Wildwood's, you've got a copy of Rob Wildwood's book. I met up with Rob, and I'm good friends with Rob. And I met up with him on one of his journeys as he was writing the book into Derbyshire. We went up into Derbyshire together. And I'd got in the car, and as it happens, I had the conversation with him how frustrated I was, because I knew the book that he was writing had that kind of essence of this original book. And I said how frustrated I was. I thought I'd made it up. I thought I'd made the title up. I didn't know whether it was false memory. I didn't know what was going on. And he literally reached down into the compartment in the side of his car and pulled this book out and said, "Is this it?" And I was like,
amazing.
I'm not going nuts. But the curious thing on top of that was my mum knew my frustration about this book and the episode. And I rang her up and said, I found out the title of the book. And she said, "Oh yeah, we've got your copy in the cupboard. We've kept it for you."
Oh, so goodness.
It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy. So that book was meant to come back to me at that point.
At that point, so it was your book to begin with, not one of your friends.
Yes, and
it was your book.
I think I was gifted it from that point, and I just put it away in my cupboard in my childhood bedroom, I think, to keep it safe, and it was there all along.
Oh, good old mum for keeping hold of that, because they're often very well known for sort of putting things into the jumble sale at school without you knowing, aren't they?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that is amazing. Gosh, and I love that, as young people and children, they have an idea. Let's just go and do this. And then they act upon it. They go and do it. It's just something like that is what life should be about, shouldn't it? This is this is what we are. We are creative beings. We have these sparks of inspiration and these ideas. And, and it's so sad that, looking around, we often just don't get the opportunity to go and follow that. But look what happened as a result of that, this beautiful experience, the timing, coming up the back, meeting the deer and the mist. And I'm thinking about the experience, and thanks so much for sharing that. It's really beautiful to hear that. It sounds like if the noise was coming from around, um, it sounds like there were more than one in that case. Is that what you felt? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what sense did you get from them as it was going along? Was it sort of, yeah, what kind of sense did you get from that music itself? What did it bring up in you?
It was definitely there was an innocence about it, and an innocence, I think, of it almost was welcoming the day. That's how it felt, that it was kind of they were singing to each other, and sing because the sun had literally just started warming, really warming. I remember I'd taken my jumper off. I'd just had a vest top on, so it was warm enough, and it was just that. I think it was just the glory of the day. That's how it felt. It was just singing like a dawn chorus.
Yeah.
That kind of sense to it.
It's just absolutely beautiful I can just imagine. And when you saw this little being at first, and it sounds like you got eye contact.
Yeah.
Which again is a feature, as you know, that happens much more regularly than people would imagine if if you're not sort of into this kind of research and you're only just looking into it. The amount of encounters that involve eye contact is quite incredible, really. When you first locked eyes with it, before it got frightened and you sort of scared each other by the sound of it, or surprised each other, what was that? What was the sense between you at that moment, do you feel? Healing has helped me many times in my life when I'd reached a point where something needed to change. In 2005, I trained with Martin Brofman to learn the body mirror system of healing, which was life-changing for me. It's based on the idea that the parts of your body that don't work well reflect the parts of your life that don't work well, and about which you have tension in your consciousness. The understanding is that tension is stress, and stress causes symptoms. In a distance healing or in-person session, I move up the chakras, returning each one to wholeness using a colour map. During the process, I see images and situations, I hear words or receive impressions that tell me something about what caused the tension in that person's life. The feedback at the end of the session is a really big part of the healing. If you're interested in a chakra healing session, you can contact me at scarletofthefae@gmail.com.
I always get the sense it was almost like it was looking at me as if to say, "Oh shit, somebody's seen me." That was the sense, and then the squeal was, "No, you really have seen me."
Yeah.
It was that realization. It was it didn't want to be seen, and it shouldn't have. It was almost like it broken some cardinal rule within its clan, that you don't get caught, you don't get seen, and. It was that kind of, definitely that kind of feeling. I remember its eyes being incredibly bright black, and I know that sounds weird, but they were so glossy. They were so glossy and so twinkly. So much life. It wasn't when you see mice eyes. There is definitely a sentience there, and there is definitely a complex being. You can see in their eyes, but this was beyond that. This was. It did have a lot of depth, I think, to it, and a lot of dimension, I think, to the eyes.
Yeah. Have you ever been able to draw a picture of it or anything, or try and recreate it in any way?
I have. I did. It was only a few years ago, because I do remember it very vividly. There are bits that kind of I didn't know, I couldn't really place, and I couldn't even after the fact place how far this fur went down its back. Because I was instantly, as I'd gone from the face, it was the tweed trousers that kind of stood out. So, I did do a little sort of watercolour sketch, and at some stage I will take that and I'll, tidy it up and make it more real. Because I wanted for myself to be able to get it down. And at that point, it did become important for me to do that, to see it again, I suppose, and sort of recreate it. Recreate it in art.
Definitely. And I guess it's kind of part of the processing experience as well. And, I'd read in your chapter in Wollerton Gnomes about the fact that, and you've just mentioned it as well, that you didn't talk about it for another 10 years, and it's, how did that feel when you so innocently were sharing what you had just experienced with people that you were hanging out with and you had a relationship with? How did that feel to tell them and get the response that you did?
I think the first thing is very crestfallen, because I'd had such an amazing experience that I wanted them to have part in that, and I wanted them to experience it through what I was telling them, but also to try and help see if we could find them again, or just look for some. I think I wanted to explore. I wanted to go back to the verges and see if there was any evidence, any physical evidence. I don't know what I was expecting to find, and so I wanted some camaraderie with them, even if it was as much as they were humouring me at that time. But it just turned into a ridicule, a friendly banter ridicule. But it was I was the youngest of the group, which the dynamics were easy target anyway when you're the youngest of the group, and they were all transfixed on getting to Wayland Smithy, and that was an interesting experience as well, because that was the first time I'd ever entered into a woods and experienced being watched, intently watched. And I've had this experience at Wayland Smithy since. There is a pathway that the pathway comes from the fields and it goes into a tree line. And as you go through that tree line, it's that perfect liminal space. And I think I've experienced it twice now in that particular space, but it's almost like walking through cobwebs. And that particular day, I felt like I was under scrutiny by, and it wasn't these little creatures that I'd found. I felt an intense watching from something slightly more dominant than those creatures. And then there's Wayland Smithy itself, which is it's got such a fantastic energy to it. So all in all, but they were intent on just getting there, and because it was like that was the next, I hate to say it, but hippie kind of stop off was getting to the actual burial chamber and spending time there. So there was a lot of jibes, and it petered out quite a lot quite quickly, because I dismissed it too. I think to them, I just must have been seeing things, that kind of thing. So
it's so kind of reflective of. It's like your first realization that that's kind of that's where the world's at.
Yeah.
Even if they're people that, we know and love and that we would regard as really open-minded. Something like that is just so, isn't it odd that it's just so outside people's ken that they just, no, draw a blank. And, and you can understand. I mean, I can understand, I'm sure before you had that experience, if someone had said to you that, that this is what is possible, then you would have perhaps laughed it off as well, because it is just so outside our understanding and what we're taught about the world and
taught about in terms of supernatural and paranormal. It's so outside the realms when it comes to fairies that even in the paranormal community, which I'm very much a part of, talking about the Fae or talking about elementals, even those very open-minded people to the supernatural and to the to high strangeness still find it very difficult. I mean, the tide is turning, but they still find it very, very difficult to swallow that pill, really. And it's a whole raft of complexities of cultural context that have created that it's still seen as childish folly. It's still seen as something that there is. It's not something that adults enter into, because it's make believe. It's Santa Claus and pixies and elves. The make believe. So I can understand people's reaction completely. And it's sad. It is sad, but I do understand it.
Yeah, I There's two things I wanted to ask you about there, and I'll park one of them. I'm going to say it so I don't forget, but I want to ask you about your involvement with the paranormal team that brought you in about the pixie. So I just want to park that a moment. Just what you were saying there, that it is still such a big step. Now, what I find very interesting is that myself, yourself, Claire Casely from Fairy Whispering and Weird Wonderful Wonders podcast, Beth Ann Briggs Miller as well, all and there'll be more. We all had the inspiration to do what we're doing now, looking into this kind of research at the beginning of lockdown. Now, what you were saying there again about the paranormal community, maybe the tide is turning, and just people generally, okay, most people are still going to think this is, utter nonsense and completely ridiculous. But people are interested. More people are becoming interested. What do you think that's about? I mean, obviously we had lockdown. We all felt, I would say, called to do this.
Definitely. It was a massive calling, and before the YouTube, bizarrely enough, and I can't even remember how it happened. It was right at the beginning of COVID, so I think it was just as lockdowns. It was that first couple of weeks. I had made contact with a lady who had contacts with people in America. They were all kind of everybody. I mean, they were from all different kinds of disciplines. Her kind of research was ufology, interterrestrials, that kind of thing. There was somebody who was a spiritual teacher. There were so many people, and I can't even remember how those nodes of people got together. But we created a network right at the very beginning that was literally. It was a calling from the Fae, basically. Every single one of these people who were in that node, they'd had, they'd had some workings with fairies and elementals before that, but there was this huge urge to literally globally connect us, to help connect the energy of the fairy where we were, to create this web, if you like, around the globe. And I seriously can't remember how that began, but we had regular dealings, and then it just dispersed as quickly as, and there was no rhyme or reason. It was almost like, okay, then that phase is over, and everybody from that group went on to really start pushing forward in their own disciplines, notions of the Fae, but there was a real rise, I think, in a lot of people's consciousness about the earth, which was one of them, because people were getting out more and walking more. But it seemed much deeper than that. Now, I do some work with the Fae very tentatively, and I'd had a lot of interaction on a psychic level up until that point. I'd probably had about 3 years of interaction where I'd had, visions and meditative meetings, etc., with them, and I felt like they had forsaken me. That's the only word that I can. And it was I was grieving doubly because of the COVID thing, and I was still walking in the woods, and the woods were quiet, and I was asking questions about if they had any view on what was going off, or were they having input in what was going off. And it was so quiet for me. Usually I would get very clear signs. Somewhere along the way, I would get very clear signs. And this went on for probably about 9 months for me. It was just, I got really angry, actually. I got really angry of I'm going out there and I'm trying to be an ambassador for you guys, and I'm doing my best, and you've left me. And when I'd called this out, I got a series of images of times when they had given me very clear signs, and I just missed them. I just blanked them out completely, because I think everybody was so embroiled in the horror that was going on around us, that we forgot to see. And I think that was a massive message for a lot of people, that don't forget to see, this is a material, this is a material problem that's happening, but there is still the spiritual, and you're going to have to really work hard with that much sludge in the material world. You're going to have to work that extra hard, and we're still here. We're still here.
Yeah, I can imagine that, because it was a really heavy time. It was a really heavy time for people for all sorts of reasons, wasn't it? But, looking back even slightly before then as well, if you look at 2019 and you had the uprisings, people getting out into the street, you had Extinction Rebellion. I've got a kid that was at school around then, and they were all walking out of school to go and take part in these marches. People were rising up. People were battling back for the sake of the earth, before everything got shut down, right? So, it's interesting to look back. It's really interesting to see that something was happening, and this wave happening, and obviously, people were feeling it and getting together to see what they could do. But even despite lockdown, you had this sense to go in and pick up what you were doing and really run with it. And many of us did. And I love that a number of us, know each other, and we're all doing some similar work, but also quite different as well, because we've all got our own, we're all different people, and we have our different approaches. We've had different experiences along the way and all the rest of it. But I think what we're doing, I feel, as a group is so helpful. As you say, it's an extension of what you were describing before, these people kind of coming together to do something. So you're working with these paranormal groups. I think you touched on this in Claire's, your interview with Claire, which I must highly recommend, because the orb action that was going on there was hilarious, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, it was. I've had a couple here.
Have you?
When you were talking, I had a really bright one that sort of went by. We're not super active tonight, but it's building.
Well, something's been here, because there's kind of a white something. You would call it sort of a shadow, but it wasn't shadow because it was white, if anything. When you were talking about, the part when you were talking about coming together with people before lockdown, and it was when you were talking about that, there was something going on here and then down here as well. So, yeah, and I thought, yep, that's Kate.
Yeah, you blame me. That's fine. You can blame me.
Well, I do get stuff going on in this house, but it's usually in the lounge. I mean, it's not particularly old house. It's just a sort of 1930s ex-council house. But there is always stuff going on, but not usually in here, funnily enough. So when that happened, I thought, yep, there we go. But we've been all right so far with no kind of tech things going off, because usually you attract that as well. But your interview with Claire, when it was just kind of zooming orbs going on all over the place, and it was a really fun interview. And you touched upon this one time where the guy that was the researcher, he was a paranormal researcher, and there was something going on with a pixie, and you were brought in to chat to the pixie and to find out what was going on. Can you tell us about that?
So I'm part of Barry Guy, who is on Help My House is Haunted. I'm part of his paranormal team. And I was very blessed when I made the decision to become a paranormal investigator. I kind of, things snowballed very, very quickly when I'd made that decision, and I ended up working with Barry very early on, and it's a fantastic team. It's a brilliant team. But I started having interactions with the Fae in haunted properties as part of that team, and Barry's very open-minded, and we were getting electronic voice phenomena from these properties, whether it be we do public events as well as private events. So we were getting evidence that was backing up what I was picking up on a psychic level. So he understood that's kind of where my strength is. I've tried in mediumship, I'm not a medium. It's not something that I find easy or something I'm comfortable with doing. However, the astral beings, if you like, those who have never been human incarnate, tend to want to kind of chat with me, which is nice sometimes. Sometimes it's not so great. I just remembered a story about that. That's why I giggled. Anyway, so Barry phoned me up. He was on set. So he was out at a private case that they were filming for the second series of Help My House is Haunted. And he said, very briefly, he said, we have something going off here I think that you'll be able to help with. And I kind of stopped him very early on in the conversation. And I said, I don't want any information whatsoever, because he'd asked me if I could do some remote viewing. So he sent me a photograph. I asked for a photograph of the front door because it helps me to then go into a meditative state and enter a building.
Yeah.
And that's all that I was given. So he gave me this photograph of the front door. I asked him to give me a couple of hours so that I could go into a deep meditation and see what I could discover. And I didn't really need to go into a deep meditation. It wasn't a real chore. I literally, did some breathing, got into a meditative state, and opened the front door. And I was immediately in a hallway, and there was this thing pinging around. It was almost like a comic book sort of running around this hallway. And chuntering, just randomly chuntering, and I couldn't understand what it was saying. It was nonsensical to me. It was another language that it was sort of chuntering away in. And it realised I was there and kind of stopped abruptly in front of me. And this thing didn't even give me a chance to introduce myself or say, what I was doing there. It was literally stood there wagging its finger and being really angry and sort of shaking, stomping up and down. And I kind of got it into a state where, and it was kind of flexing these spiky bits coming off of it as it was doing it. So it was basically showing me physically that it was really unhappy. So it was these spiky bits were coming off of it. And I eventually got it to calm down and that I didn't understand it. And I understood that it was angry, but I didn't, I wanted to understand why it was angry. He was angry. And as he calmed down, he took a more humanoid shape and he looked, and this is relevant, he looked very sort of Northern French, very stout, kind of, I suppose, an atypical kind of stout French guy, prominent nose, dark hair, dark eyes. And he kept saying, it was my tree, it was my tree, it was my tree. And then he gave me an image of an orchard. And the image that he gave me was an orchard that I knew from childhood, which was an apple orchard. And he was saying it was my tree, they cut it down. And he kind of impressed on me, because he kept just saying it's my tree, but he impressed on me that the couple who lived in the property had cut down a tree for what he saw as no good reason. He said it wasn't a sick tree. It wasn't encroaching on any of the other trees. They cut it down because it was aesthetically not pleasing to them.
Yeah. And
it was his tree. So he was in the house and causing havoc. And I was very kind of, it was a hugely clear meditation. There was no, that was it. And I thought, I've got to go back to Barry and tell him what I have seen. And I rang him up and I said, this is what I've seen. And he said, yeah, that fits in with the stuff that we've been getting. But he hadn't come across the tree theory. So he went back. He said, I'm going to go and talk to the owners. And he went to speak to the owners and they said, yeah, we did. Now, what didn't make the cut of that particular episode, because they couldn't fit it into the time frame of the narrative of it, was they did live in France before moving to that house in Devon.
Yeah.
And in that house in France, they had a small orchard and they did cut down one of the trees because I think it was impeding their view of something or other. So they had chopped down that apple tree, and this thing had followed them from France, and it was attached to, they had a little replica auger, iron auger, and with tiny little frying pans on top. And there's actually a scene of one of the investigators, Jane Harris, who's brilliant. She was asking questions, and they knew that there was kind of issues around this tiny miniature auger. And as she's asking questions, one of the frying pans flies off, and kind of, and it was a brilliant piece of footage that they caught. Absolutely brilliant. So I relayed this information. They had also chopped down a tree in their current garden, which didn't help the situation at all.
No.
It just further angered this being, basically. Yeah. So I was able then, with the research and the knowledge, and having spoken to this being, that it could be appeased, and the trouble could disperse if they were more mindful of nature, that it's not there for our pleasure, as in we can't take it away and put it in at will without there being consequences, especially trees. So I know from I spoke to them after the show, and a little while later they were still getting some issues, which I'm not surprised. I think this being had well and truly attached itself and was going to get its full penny's worth of being mischievous. But they went and they planted a replacement apple tree in their garden to help bridge that gap and that relationship again. But it was amazing. It was amazing to have that interaction with the being, and bizarrely enough, the medium at the time on the first two series is Chris Fleming, lovely guy, and he's very aware of the Fae. And he had done a drawing of what he'd seen, because he'd seen, unbeknownst to me, he'd seen this character. And Barry had also done a drawing, again unbeknownst to me. And I met up with Barry, I think it was probably a week or two later. And he said, I've got to show you this. This is bizarre. Because after they'd done these drawings, it was before I spoke to them about what I'd seen. One of the drawings that Chris had done was the spiky side of this thing that looked almost like grot. It was twig spiky, and what Barry had drawn was the little French version. So, and I said, it's the same thing. You've drawn the same energy, the same being. It's just it's different energy levels,
different aspects. That's interesting, isn't it? Because we're like with anything, when you get two people tuning into something, they might see different layers of whatever, whether it's a being or if you're looking at auras or whatever, like you're tuning into different kind of frequencies or layers of the same thing. Two people will see different aspects of it. So that's interesting in itself, isn't it?
It is. And I think that the other ththing about that is I have learned through doing remote viewings and going into haunted properties that a lot of the time, because the astral world is the energetic planes are simply that, are energetic, that these things are able to create themselves in a way that we understand them. And I might be going off on a tangent here.
No, go for it.
So how I came across this was when I was practicing mediumship. It's great when you're a paranormal investigator and you're going into properties to practice mediumship, because obviously there are energies of the deceased in those places. And after about 3 different properties that I'd gone to, and I was getting women in the same coloured dress, slight variations of era of dress, but it was the same blue. And it got to a bit like, come on, what is going on here? And I finally twigged, I think on the 3rd encounter, that it was an astral way, an unconscious connection of me understanding that those women were anxious or down. So they were wearing a colour that denoted their state at point of death. And the anxiety that they had carried over with them from point of death. So I think it's the same, or there's a similar thing that goes off with the Fae, that they will show you an aspect, A, that you understand, and B, of their emotional status.
Yeah.
So they can, I think they can change at will for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, sometimes you receive messages and it's kind of like a metaphor of some sort, or a code, like you say, showing you the orchard that you used to see as a child. It's like the way that you receive it. It goes in as energy, information. You receive it in a certain way so that you can understand it. And if you are able to clearly to be open initially to receive that, and also just to be open to allow that to come up, rather than think, oh, why am I thinking that, and pushing it away, just allowing it to come up and allowing that flow. That's when, that's what makes you, very, very good at what you do, basically, because you're open and you just trust what you're getting. I think, a lot of people are naturally psychic, but they will decide that it's just nonsense if they're trying to do that. If they're trying to tune in to perhaps themselves or something else, if something comes up, they just kind of dismiss it. So it's a good lesson in that, isn't it? And I think also the more you practice this, the clearer the channels become too, which is helpful. And you also mentioned that you'd had a situation where you'd had communication from a fairy or elemental that wasn't so good. Do you want to talk about that or no?
Yes, I can do. I can do. I am grinning because this is my maddest hour. It is one of those that every time I recall this story and tell this story, I absolutely understand every word that comes out of my mouth. Sounds like I should be in an asylum, because this outblew every other experience I think that I've ever had, whether it be paranormal, supernatural, all the weirdness and the wonders of the world. This kind of blew it out of the water.
This section is available for all members of the Curious Crew who support me on Patreon. Join us there for this and more bonus content. Patreon.com/the Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.
Yeah,
so definitely. You can't mess with this. You can't take anything for granted, and you can't dishonor and disrespect. I mean, and you'll be the same as me when I'm doing my project and, talking to people and, putting stuff out there or going in various avenues. I do check in.
Yeah.
From time to time, I do check in. Or if it's something that comes up and I'm not sure about it, I'll ask, is this okay? And I will wait for an answer. And, whichever way you go about it, do it your own way. But that is something that I do because you don't want to piss them off, basically.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, this is it.
I mean, they have a very different value system and a morality that I find very difficult to get to grips with. They are not, I think, as human beings, we're very much, we live by boxing things off and we are predisposed to be obsessed with making sense of everything. That's part of human nature, and the Fae aren't. And I do find it then difficult to get to grips with, where they're coming from and what they're trying to communicate. And as you know, they can be very tricksy. So even when you're checking in, I think with me, that side of dealing with that side of the Fae. I'm sorry, my dog is grumbling at the door. I don't know whether you can hear.
I can hear something. Yeah.
Oh, bless
it. Howling for mum.
So with the kind of the darker side of the Fae, and when I say that, I don't mean sort of that's the only way that I can box it, is that kind of end of the spectrum where they are more mischievous and converge on malevolent. The level of trickster just goes through the roof. It goes through the roof. So I do find them slippy characters, and I do find them slippy characters in terms of asking for permission for things, or I basically kind of put it out there that this is what I'm doing, and if it's not okay, let me know, but I need to know why. Let's be straight, because they will be convoluted rabbit holes that you'll go down without being without being straight with them. I often say about and this is the other thing that I get quite a lot of those who are enthusiastic about working with fairies, and I'm sure you get it as well. People ask, how do I work with them? And my first response is don't.
Okay.
Because it's like you don't, unless you are very specific about what you're inviting in and why you're inviting in. You could get anything. Anything's open to invite under that circumstances.
It's interesting. Yeah, of course. With your work with the paranormal, you've seen it all, really, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've seen how it can go badly wrong.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I mean, in terms of, and I know that you are probably very aware of this in your practice as well, but I think one of the nice ways that you can work with that kind of energy is definitely if you're gardening. I mean, this is a lovely way to work with that kind of energy, is ask them to have input in the energy of things that you're growing, and helping out with, planting and growing things, because they love that it's part of their understanding. And I'd never invite them into my house though, knowingly.
No, have to be really careful about that for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So looking at the various experiences that you've had, and also bearing in mind we've been kind of called to do this at this time, and what do you think is going on? Do you think that there is a message there? And if so, what's your guess of what is going on? Do you have any sense of that?
I think there is a rise in connectivity, and I think the part of it is that the energies of the Fae saw this coming well before we did. Whenever we have trauma that reverberates globally as human beings, wars, famines, etc., when something ripples out across the earth, there seems to be a spike and a raising in the consciousness of things of a spiritual nature. And we see that in the Second World War, seances, etc., just became very, very popular. And I think with the Fae, it's also coupled with, and this is where I go really hippy dippy with this, I kind of breathe out a bit when I say this, because I'm very, very aware of how I look. But
that's cool. It's welcome. It's very welcome here. I am very hippy dippy myself.
I know, it's great. It is great. But I think that when I think, that we are incredibly disrespectful of nature as a whole. And we see it as a commodity, and we see it as a thing of a commercial standing, something that we can take from with putting nothing back and giving nothing back, and we have no connection with the things that we eat and the land that we're on. And this, I think, massively affects, because the fairies are probably the closest astral realm that we have to the material realm that we work with. And sorry, that's a dog scratching again. Yeah. So it means that they are massively affected by how we are dealing with the earth. So I think that they raise us to help and raise themselves through the earth energy. I think that that's one of the aspects of it.
Yeah, it makes absolute sense to me. Yeah, so we've got to get ourselves straight in order to aid this planet, but also to aid beings in these other realms that we are no doubt affecting with our own behaviours.
Yeah, definitely.
So before you go, I would really love to see some of your creations, because I feel that they are a little bit of love going out into the world, a little bit of fairy mystery going out into the world. So yeah, can you show us some of your mushroom crafts, please?
I can. So the mushroom thing is something that kind of heightened again around about the COVID time, and obviously there is connections with the Fae and the dead, etc. But
Oh,
mushrooms, amongst other things, have
there was a
taken
huge
a.
big orb that just shot behind your back there. It was kind of like a
Oh,
bluey, quite a bluey sort of silvery color that just shot down. Yeah, just
nice.
shot down the
Didn't
back.
didn't see that. They're obviously liking the mushrooms. So
Yeah,
I'm going to give you a sneak peek of a big piece that I'm working on,
cool. Okay.
literally at the minute. But um, generally, it's kind of manifesting into. Oh, that's going to be awful lighting.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Oh,
into.
yeah. Tip it. You could tip it and then you can. Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
I think my light. Let me
They're
just see if I can.
earrings.
Yeah. So my camera's not the best. So they're earrings. I'll show
Really
you.
sweet.
I don't know how well you'll be able to see these. So that's kind of I did an elfiny type range of pendants, and that's two
Oh,
leaves and
beautiful.
tiger's eye. So it's manifesting in different ways, but I'll show you my latest. So I've started doing it.
Mm,
This is going to be a lamp.
amazing. That is incredible. Tons of
So yeah,
work there.
the mushrooms are taking over my life. Mushrooms came along and the gnomes followed suit. They were not far behind, to be fair.
Yeah, I had wanted to ask you about your relationship with mushrooms because I wondered how that tied in. So just could you have you got time to will your dog be okay?
Yeah, of
You
course. Yeah,
can
yeah,
bring her in if you want.
yeah. She's fine. She's fine.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
she'd be a pain. She'd be swinging off my jumper. Um. So the mushrooms kind of I have to create. So there are things that I do that I'm happy to create and just to go along with,
Mm.
and then there are things that I have to purge. And I can't not do it. I can't cope without getting something out. That last piece that I showed you, that was a purge piece that had been floating around in my head, and I had to get it out into 3 dimension. And that's the mushrooms. That's how they've taken me. And it was. I mean, I've always created mushrooms when I've been building and making it, but it's never been a predominant theme. And it became a predominant theme at the start of lockdown, about the time when all this started happening for everybody.
Mm.
And at the fairy festival Fairy Fair in Glastonbury, in not the last one, but the one in March that I did.
Yeah. Mhm.
I have a friend, Amarelle Hamilton, who is a fantastic sculptress. She makes the most beautiful sort of mythical, magical creatures.
Oh.
And she came over and she said to Kate, "I'm not surprised that you've ended up doing mushrooms, because I was saying I can't stop. I'm just obsessed." And I said, "Well, why?" And she said, "Well, there is a huge connection between mushrooms and fairies. We have fairy rings. We have the association with the Amanita, with fairies, because of the shamanic practice of taking Amanita. But there's also the connection with mushrooms with the dead. There is historical rituals that take place. There are, Aztec mushroom men who were kind of conduits of going over into the other worlds, and death, etc. And I just thought the two worlds have collided for me in the form of mushrooms, because they are symbolic
Yeah.
of I suppose the other energies, because they are fascinating. They're neither plant nor animal. They're almost alien. It just all converged, I think, and that's
Mm.
and it was I never even thought of it. I just make mushrooms. That's what I do.
Wow. Yeah, I can really see that. They're coming up from the earth and they are so mysterious, aren't they?
Definitely,
In this
definitely.
interconnection. That is really cool. Oh, thank you so much, Kate. That's been a really fascinating chat. I love hearing about these experiences, and they're all so different. So do please come back on. Tell us about your future explorations. And there's lots more that I haven't had time to ask you tonight. So yeah, you've got to come back on. Thanks again. And where can people contact you for obviously for your podcast, but also for your mushroom wares?
So I think the easiest thing is just I'm consolidating everything at the minute. So message me through Facebook. So it's Kate HareGirl Ray, or if you can find me Hare in the Hawthorn on Facebook, and you can message me through there. It's YouTube. It's Kate HareGirl Ray. That may change into Hare in the Hawthorn because that's what I call the interviews that I do. It's kind of my creative umbrella. I'm always happy to hear from people, their experiences like you. It's the experiential that really fascinates me more than there's a lot in folklore and history, but it's people's experiences that really float my boat too. So yeah. I'm always happy to hear from people.
Yeah, great. Oh, thank you. And yeah, we all need to keep talking and sharing these experiences, and who knows what comes next. But I feel like this is kind of it's called for, and yeah, let's just see. But keep doing what you're doing, because you're obviously, here to do this and have lots of gifts in this area. So yeah, it's really cool. Thanks so much, Kate. And yeah, let's speak again soon.